In the early 19th century, a collection of papyrus scrolls was discovered in a sealed tomb near Thebes in Egypt. They were written in 3 languages: Greek, Demotic Egyptian, and Coptic, sometimes all 3 in the same paragraph. They were not religious texts. They were not myths or stories or philosophy. They were instructions, step by step, precisely worded, technically specific instructions for producing specific effects, invoking specific entities, achieving altered states of consciousness through specific combinations of breathwork, vocal techniques, and visualization sequences, binding enemies, protecting the practitioner, achieving direct communication with what the authors called gods. These texts, the Greek Magical Papyri, have been translated and studied by scholars at Oxford, the University of Chicago, and Harvard. They're housed in museums in Paris, London, and Leiden. They're the subject of peer-reviewed academic journals. They are the oldest surviving practical magic manuals in the Western world. And they are not alone. A 10th century Arabic text describes a system of astrological magic so technically precise that modern researchers have traced its framework directly to Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets thousands of years older. A 15th century manuscript describes 72 entities catalogued with the specificity of a zoological taxonomy, each with a name, a rank, a physical description, a seal, and a defined area of influence, consistent across centuries and geographic locations. These texts describe language as technology. Words, correctly structured and delivered, that don't communicate. They produce effects. Here is what the oldest magic manuals in history actually say. If language and information producing physical effects is the same framework that cutting-edge theoretical physics is now beginning to formalize. Subscribe. Things That Shouldn't Exist goes this deep every single week. The collection, known academically as the Papyri Greek Magicae, emerged from a tomb near Thebes in the early 19th century, hundreds of individual texts spanning roughly 500 years of continuous practice. Greco-Roman Egypt was the most intellectually syncretic culture the ancient world produced. Egyptian temple priests, Greek philosophers, Jewish Kabbalists, and practitioners from across the Roman Empire were all working in the same intellectual space, cross-pollinating frameworks that had developed independently for millennia. What they produced reads nothing like religious devotion. A single spell specifies the planetary hour calculated from that day's sunrise. A wax figurine formed from specific materials in a specific posture. 7 Greek vowel sequences, 1 for each classical planet, pronounced at particular volumes in a particular order. A cardinal direction to face. A duration measured in breath counts. The Mithras Liturgy, pgmiv.475 to 834, is the most extensively studied text in the corpus. Its purpose: direct descent through the 7 celestial spheres and face-to-face encounter with the solar deity. The method: a rhythmic breathwork protocol drawing atmospheric energy into the body, followed by visualization of cosmological imagery at each of 7 ascending stages, punctuated by pronunciation of divine names matched to each level. Neuroscientists studying the documented phenomenology of advanced meditative states have noted the correspondence is not approximate. The liturgy describes the same sequence of perceptual shifts, physiological markers, reports of expanded spatial awareness that modern clinical research documents in controlled settings. The practitioners weren't accessing the supernatural. They were operating a technology for producing reproducible states of consciousness, precise enough to write down and hand to someone else. Written in Arabic Andalusia in the 10th or 11th century, the text called Gayat al-Hakim, the goal of the wise, runs to 400 pages of unbroken technical density. Its subject: the production of specific material and psychological effects through the precise alignment of talismanic objects with planetary configurations. Each of the 7 classical planets governs a defined set of metals, plants, animals, colors, incenses, and psychological states. Talismans must be constructed during specific degree positions of the target planet: rising, unafflicted, in favorable aspect. Operations attempted outside these windows are described as ineffective, regardless of the practitioner's skill. This is not folk superstition. It is a precision system with defined variables and defined failure conditions. What stopped researchers was what came before it. Cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia, some predating the Egyptian Old Kingdom, contain planetary correspondence tables matching the Picatrix's system with uncomfortable specificity. Same metals, plants, and spiritual timing logic. The Arabic text claims to synthesize a far older tradition, and the archaeological record at the oldest known layer of human writing confirms it wasn't fabricating that lineage. Someone developed this framework before recorded history began. It survived transmission through Babylon, through Hellenistic Egypt, through the Islamic Golden Age, and arrived in medieval Europe intact. The Ars Goetia, first book of the 17th century Lesser Key of Solomon, presents 72 entries in a format indistinguishable from a biological field guide. Each entry contains a name, a military rank within a described hierarchical structure, a physical form, sometimes multiple or sometimes shifting between them, a unique geometric seal, a quantified sphere of influence, a count of subordinate legions. Baal, first king, 66 legions, manifests as cat or toad or man or composite combinations, confers invisibility. Agares, first duke, 31 legions, appears as an elderly man on a crocodile, teaches any human language, triggers seismic events, retrieves fugitives. Stolas, prince, 26 legions, appears as an owl, transmits knowledge of astronomy and medicinal plants. The taxonomic discipline is consistent across all 72 entries, but the manuscripts feeding into the compilation came from different centuries, countries, and scribal traditions with no apparent coordination between them. In zoology, when independent observers from unconnected locations consistently describe the same organism with morphological features, that consistency is treated as evidence of a real subject. The Goetia meets that standard. The University of Vienna analysis published in 2023 found that the 72 seals, geometric symbols assigned to each entity, contain angular ratios and symmetry operations that are mathematically consistent across the entire set. These are not arbitrary drawings. They were constructed according to a shared geometric grammar that the manuscript's compilers preserved without understanding its origin. Someone built a mathematical system into these seals. The people copying the manuscripts across centuries maintained it faithfully without knowing it was there. Strip away the cultural vocabulary, deity names, ritual theater, the hierarchical cosmologies, and what remains across every major grimoire tradition is a single operational claim. Structured information, correctly formatted and delivered, produces direct physical effects. Egyptian Heka, the force embedded in correctly spoken words that shaped material reality. Hebrew Dabar, divine speech that creates rather than describes. Sanskrit Mantra, acoustic sequences whose vibrational properties produce documented neurological and physiological responses. Greek Logos, the structural principle of reality itself, expressed as language. 4 independent civilizations. 0 documented contact at the point these frameworks were developed. Identical conclusion. John Archibald Wheeler spent his career working alongside Bohr and Einstein before proposing in 1989 what he called it from bit, the hypothesis that physical reality is not fundamentally made of matter or energy, but of information. That every particle, course of study, and physical event derives its existence from binary informational choices at the quantum level. If Wheeler's framework is correct, a system that uses precisely structured language to directly produce physical effects is not invoking anything supernatural. It is interacting with the substrate that physical reality is built from. The Correct documents, describing recovered non-human technology at a classified Palo Alto facility in the 1980s, explicitly stated that the recovered craft ran on language, not controlled by it, but was the propulsion system. The symbols were the mechanism. Practitioners writing in 200 BC described the same architecture. The Greek Magical Papyri sit in European museum collections, translated by Ivy League scholars, analyzed in peer-reviewed journals. The Picatrix transmits a planetary correspondence system whose roots reach into Mesopotamian clay tablets older than the pyramids. 4 ancient civilizations, the oldest technical literature on Earth, and the newest theoretical physics are pointing at the same thing from opposite ends of a very long timeline. What sits in the middle, the 2,000 years where this knowledge went from operational manual to condemned heresy to forgotten mythology, is a history of suppression that makes everything in the Tech They Buried series look minor. That's next week's episode. Drop a comment. Does the mathematical consistency in the Goetia seals change how you think about what these texts were documenting? Because it's the detail that shifted my read on this entirely. Subscribe. I'll see you there.